disability documentation for Disability Innovation Fund DIF projects, presented by Dr. Charlie Walters and Lindsay Rasul. Hello and welcome. My name is Lindsay Rasul, and I'm a senior analyst supporting the National Clearinghouse of Rehabilitation Training Materials, or NCRTM. Dr. Charlie Walters is also with me, and he's from the Center for Transition and Career Innovation at the University of Maryland. We're really glad that you're joining us for this session on disability documentation for Disability Innovation Fund, or DIF projects. Documenting disability is a model demonstration project is more than just checking a box. It verifies eligibility, informs individualized services and accommodations, and supports accountability and evaluation. When done well, disability documentation can strengthen the overall experience for participants and help to ensure compliance. Slide 2, purpose of this session. This session is designed to help you feel more confident about what documentation is needed, when to collect it, and how to use it responsibly. We'll also talk about how documentation can actively improve services, not just fulfill a requirement. To that end, let's take a look at the session's objectives. By the end of this session, you should be able to identify acceptable forms of disability documentation for DIF project participants, understand how documentation aligns with federal definitions and reporting requirements, distinguish between presumptive eligibility, and potentially eligible individuals, apply best practices in data security, privacy, and management of personally identifiable information, PII, and recognize how disability documentation can inform individualized services and accommodations.
This is Charlie, and we're on slide 3. What counts as disability documentation? Let's start with what actually counts as acceptable documentation. For DIF project participants, we look for clear evidence that links a diagnosed disability to functional limitations. This could include supplemental security income, SSI, or Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, award letters, educational plans like Individualized Education Programs, IEPs, or 504 plans, medical or psychological evaluations, or records from vocational rehabilitation, VR, or campus disability services. The key is that the documentation confirms the presence of a disability and its impact on daily activities or participation. We'll walk through each of these in more detail on the next few slides. Slide 4. SSI, SSDI award letters. One of the simplest and most reliable ways to document a disability is with a Social Security award letter. If a participant receives SSI or SSDI benefits due to a disability, they are considered presumptively eligible. In these cases, no additional verification is needed, just the award letter itself. However, it's essential to retain that documentation in the case file. Verbal confirmation isn't sufficient. The official notice is needed to meet compliance standards. While grantees don't always require an in-depth or detailed account of a person's disability, it's still important to understand how their disability affects them or poses potential barriers to employment. You might be wondering, if it's so straightforward, why are we even discussing it? The reason is that a project participant still needs to take some action to obtain the award letter. The easiest way is often through their online Social Security account, or by calling their local Social Security Administration, SSA office. If they need assistance, Ask whether they have a representative payee who might be able to help. These letters usually include the type of benefit, the start date, and the diagnosis, making them a critical piece of documentation for eligibility. Slide 5, Education Records as Disability Documentation. When documenting a participant's disability, education records can be an important and sometimes overlooked source of information. Let's take a closer look at how records like IEPs and 504 plans can help establish eligibility, what to look for, and how participants can access these documents. Education records, such as IEPs or 504 plans, can serve as valid sources of disability documentation. These records are especially useful when they reflect a formal eligibility determination under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, or Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. However, the level of detail across disability documentation and education records can vary widely depending on whether a student has an IEP or a 504 plan. It's important for grantees to carefully evaluate 504 documentation to ensure it provides sufficient evidence of a qualifying disability under the DIF program. Some helpful details to keep in mind. Schools may categorize disabilities using terms like SLD, which stands for Specific Learning Disability, OHI, or Other Health Impairment, ID for Intellectual Disability, and ED, which means Emotional Disturbance, just to name a few. These categories align with IDEA definitions. Education records may also include formal assessments such as psychological evaluations, speech and language assessments, or functional behavior assessments. Participants, or their parents or guardians if they are minors, can request copies of these education records directly from their school or district. For students with IEPs, records are typically maintained by the Special Education Office and usually include comprehensive evaluations that were part of the eligibility determination under the IDEA. For students with 504 plans, records might be maintained by a different office, such as Student Services or a designated 504 coordinator, and the documentation may not be as detailed. While 504 plans must be based on evidence of a disability, they may not always include formal psychoeducational evaluations. Schools are required by the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, to provide access to education records upon requests. If existing documentation is incomplete or outdated, participants can inquire about their current eligibility status and available records. And if you want to dig deeper, more information can be found under Section 300.8 of the IDEA. This section of the IDEA defines and clarifies the categories of disabilities that qualify a child for special education services. However, keep in mind that the reevaluation processes differ between the IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Slide 6, Medical or Psychological Records as Disability Documentation. When we're working to verify a participant's eligibility, having solid medical or psychological documentation can really help us get a clear picture of their needs and challenges. Although qualified personnel need not be medical or mental health professionals in all instances, the Department of Education anticipates that in most instances, eligibility to participate in a DIF project will be supported by some formal documentation. Even when the grantee can easily determine an individual is eligible for DIF services, it could be beneficial to obtain other current records relevant to the information learned during the interview, to obtain a better understanding of the individual's service needs. Even if you're pretty sure someone qualifies, having up-to-date and clear paperwork can give you a better idea of what kind of support they really need. Specifically, we're looking for documentation that is recent and detailed enough to truly reflect the participant's current situation. Ideally, these records list a diagnosis, show how it affects the person's life, and indicate whether the condition is expected to improve or remain stable. Sometimes, participants already have documentation from past appointments, like letters or evaluation reports, and those can be really helpful. Just keep in mind, whatever you use should be signed, dated, and include the provider's credentials. Most of the time, this kind of documentation comes from licensed professionals such as doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, or licensed clinical social workers. It's important that the information comes from a qualified provider and is directly related to the services you're offering.
This is Lindsay speaking again. Slide 7. Observation alone is not enough. When you've worked with individuals with disabilities for a while, you might start to recognize certain signs like trouble with focus, memory, or mobility. And while those observations can be meaningful, it's important to remember that it's not our role to diagnose. That's up to the qualified professionals. Observations alone don't count as documentation, and self-reports aren't enough either. For instance, if a participant shares that they've had a traumatic brain injury, TBI, that information by itself isn't enough to determine eligibility. You need something like a neuropsychological evaluation from a qualified provider to support their eligibility for DIF services. In short, documented observations must come from somebody with the appropriate credentials. Self-reporting alone just doesn't meet the requirement. As you review documentation, always consider whether what you see on paper aligns with your own observation of the participant's needs, strengths, and barriers. Your observations can help guide those deeper conversations, but formal records are still required to officially document a disability. Slide 8, categories of VR eligibility. Knowing which document fits each VR eligibility category can really smooth out your intake process and cut down on waiting times. When you're clear about what to look for, you can guide participants better and avoid unnecessary back and forth. Let's walk through the 3 main categories and the kinds of documentation you'll commonly see with each. For those that are potentially eligible, documentation might not be the typical medical report. Instead, you'll often see educational records like IEPs or 504 plans, which highlight what supports the student needs. You might also get notes from teachers or counselors, and these don't always confirm a clinical diagnosis, but they give a good picture of the challenges the individual faces. The good news is these records are often pretty easy to get because schools and families usually have them on file. If the participant doesn't have them handy, reaching out to the staffing specialist or guidance counselor is your best bet. Potentially eligible individuals may have a disability, but some of the more formal documentation may not have been gathered yet. When a participant is eligible, you're usually looking at formal evaluations or diagnoses from licensed professionals like doctors, psychologists, or specialists. This might include mental health assessments or physical exams that explain how the disability affects day-to-day life. These documents help us understand the extent of functional limitations so we can tailor services appropriately. Because these often involve scheduling appointments or getting reports from outside providers, it can take more time to collect. For those already in the VR system, counselors have up to 60 days to make an eligibility determination, though many complete it sooner and are required to do so as soon as possible. Finally, we have presumptive eligibility. For presumptively eligible individuals, eligibility is pretty straightforward. If they have SSI or SSDI award letters, that's usually all you need. This paperwork alone meets federal standards because SSA has already done the heavy lifting in determining disability. This is one of the fastest ways to confirm eligibility since participants often bring these letters with them, and they can even print them from their own accounts. Helpful tip. Using the RSA crosswalk tool lets you match disability categories across different systems like RSA, WIOA, and IDEA, which keeps your reporting consistent and accurate. Slide 9, why document disability? Let's talk now about why documenting disability is so important. First, it's a requirement spelled out in the Notice Inviting Applications, or NIA, for your project. Equally as important, disability documentation helps determine whether somebody is eligible for DIF services. It ensures we're serving the intended population and confirms that participants qualify for the grant-funded supports. But it doesn't stop there. Proper documentation also helps us tailor services and accommodation to each individual's needs. It connects participants with the right supports, whether that's assistive technology, transition planning, or other accommodations, making the experience more meaningful and effective. Finally, accurate disability documentation enables us to collect and analyze data across the project. This helps identify trends in disability types, services, and outcomes, supporting project improvement and strategic decisions. It also ensures we can provide accurate reports to RSA and strengthen evaluation efforts throughout the project. In short, disability documentation is foundational to everything we do, from eligibility to service delivery to improving the project over time. Slide 10, timing of documentation collection. Now that we've covered what qualifies as disability documentation and the types of records that are most helpful, let's shift gears and talk about when to collect that documentation. Timing plays a big role in making sure services are well informed and clearly supported from the start. There are a few key points in the participant's journey when collecting documentation is especially important, and let's walk through each of them now. One of the most critical times is during enrollment or intake. This is the ideal time to gather that documentation. You're already working on consents, releases, and general intake paperwork, so it makes sense to collect disability documentation here too. This can happen directly through your intake process, or it might be documentation already gathered by a partner, sub-award, or referral source. Either way, the goal is to establish a clear foundation early on. But it doesn't stop there. Documentation may also be needed later, especially when something changes or when you're planning the next step of service delivery. These additional documentation needs can be planned or unplanned. Let's go over the planned situations first. You might request updated records during a scheduled reassessment, a transition planning process, or at a key milestone in someone's service plan, like when a new service is being added or eligibility for something specific that needs to be reviewed. Then there's the unplanned situations, and these happen more often than you think. Maybe a participant experiences a new barrier, a recent injury, a new diagnosis, or a mental health challenge that wasn't present before. Or maybe they ask for a new accommodation that wasn't previously needed. Sometimes you might notice the original documentation on file is outdated or incomplete, especially when you're reviewing files as part of routine service delivery. In any case, the golden rule is this: documentation should always be collected for a clear reason, with the right consent in place, and only as detailed as needed to support services. Avoid collecting unnecessary records that aren't directly tied to the participant's goal or your project's requirements. Reflection prompt. Take a moment to think about your current intake process. Are you capturing disability documentation in a way that informs individualized services, or are you just checking a box for eligibility? Could your approach be strengthened to help tailor support more effectively?
This is Charlie, and we're picking up on slide 11, clarifying sub-awardee and partner roles. Now that we've covered when and what to document, let's turn our attention to the important roles sub-awardees and partners may play in collecting and managing disability documentation. First, it's important to be clear about roles and responsibilities. Sub-awardees and partners might be the ones collecting documentation during intake, service delivery, or even eligibility determination. Everyone handling disability documentation must follow federal and state privacy laws and stick to the project's data management plan to keep all information safe and secure. Next, let's talk about authorization and sharing information. Sub-awardees and partners need proper authorization to collect or access documentation. And remember, documentation should never be shared unless there's a signed release of information and it fits within the rules for informed consent. When sharing data, it should always be limited to just what's necessary for coordinating services or for reporting purposes. When it comes to releases and consent, it's best to use standardized forms. These forms should clearly explain what information can be shared, who it can be shared with, and why. It's also important that these releases have a set time frame so that they don't allow open-ended sharing, and they should be reviewed regularly to stay up to date. Make sure participants know they have the right to revoke their consent at any time and that they understand how to do that. Finally, building trust and keeping things running smoothly among all partners is key. Having consistent documentation procedures helps cut down on confusion and avoids unnecessary duplication of effort. It's a good idea to have clear protocols for how sub-awardees let grantees know when eligibility is confirmed. This could be through standardized summary forms or written attestations. And don't forget to include these documentation practices in onboarding and training for any new partners joining the project. And if you're looking for a pro tip, consider creating a simple checklist or flow chart that spells out who collects what, when it's collected, how it's stored, and how it's shared. This keeps everyone on the same page while protecting participant privacy. Slide 12, protecting PII and ensuring security. Let's take a moment to talk about PII. This refers to any data that can directly or indirectly identify someone, things like a full name, social security number, a home address, as well as combinations like zip code, age, and disability type. If you're ever unsure, the Data Management Primer is a great resource. It outlines examples and references key privacy laws like FERPA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, and the Privacy Act. Now, the key principle here is to collect only what is necessary. That means sticking to documentation that's essential for verifying eligibility or supporting services. Try to avoid gathering highly sensitive health or background details unless they're clearly connected to the goals of your project or required for reporting. It's worth doing a quick self-check from time to time. Are you collecting medical records that include information unrelated to the participant's needs? Are background checks being requested without a clear connection to grant objectives? Are staff asking for updated records even when what's already on file confirms eligibility? These are signs you might be collecting more than what's actually needed. Whenever you collect or share disability-related documentation, always make sure you have a written, informed consent. When information needs to be shared with partners, use release forms that clearly state what's being shared, how it will be used, who will receive it, and how long it will be kept on file. Also, remember the principle of least privilege. Only give staff access to the data they need to do their jobs. No more, no less. This helps protect participant information and reduces risk. Be sure that any data storage and sharing is done using secure, encrypted systems, and that you have procedures in place to regularly audit access and dispose of records safely when they're no longer needed. Finally, let's talk about your data management plan. Think of it as your blueprint. It outlines how data will be collected, stored, shared, retained, and securely destroyed. And because things evolve, your data management plan should be treated as a living document, updated as your processes and team's needs change. Pro tip: treat documentation and data practices as part of participant trust building. Strong privacy practices not only meet compliance, they show respect for each person's dignity and autonomy. Reflection prompt: are the types of documentation you're currently collecting aligned with what's considered acceptable? Is there anything you're collecting that might not be necessary? Slide 13, essential versus enhanced functions of documentation. Let's pause here to talk about something that has the potential to come up, especially with new grantees. There's often a tension between wanting detailed, helpful documentation and accidentally collecting more than what's really needed. It's true that disability documentation can include complex or even clinical information like psychoeducational evaluations or medical reports. But that doesn't mean we need to become experts in interpreting those documents. What's important is understanding how to use the information appropriately. So here's a helpful way to think about it. Essential documentation is what directly supports eligibility, accommodations, and services. You need this to confirm that someone qualifies for your project and to help tailor the supports they'll receive. Enhanced documentation goes a step further. It's when you use information, often in aggregate, to improve your project over time. This might include identifying patterns in participant needs or adjusting your service model. But in these cases, you're not analyzing every individual file. You're looking at broad trends, ideally using de-identified data that have already been collected for essential purposes. This distinction helps ensure you're collecting the right amount of information, using it for the right reasons, and not putting undue pressure on yourself or on your participants to go beyond what's truly necessary and seeking assistance through technical assistance where necessary. Slide 14, Principles for Sustainable Documentation. Let's wrap up this section by looking at a few guiding principles for sustainable documentation practices. These are practical tips you can use to strengthen how your project collects, manages, and applies disability documentation, not just for compliance, but in ways that really support your participants. First, be strategic. Only collect what you need to confirm eligibility and deliver individualized services. It's easy to fall into the trap of gathering just-in-case paperwork, but that can create unnecessary work and confusion. A streamlined process helps you stay focused and efficient. Second, go beyond the checkbox. Documentation shouldn't just sit in a file to meet a requirement. Use it as a tool to understand the person in front of you, what supports they need, what accommodations might help them thrive, and how you can build services that are truly individualized. Next, share with purpose. Anytime you're sharing PII, make sure it's with someone who is authorized and that it aligns with the participant's signed consent. Clear boundaries and respect for privacy build trust. They may also help keep you in compliance. Finally, plan ahead. Think through how you'll store, retain, and securely dispose of documentation. Build these processes into your data management plan so that everyone on your team knows what to do and when. This helps protect sensitive information and ensures consistency across your project. These small but meaningful steps can make a big difference, both in the quality of your work and the confidence your participants place in your project.
Slide 15, making documentation work for you. Let's talk about how you can make documentation work for you, not just as a compliance requirement, but as a tool to support participants more effectively. Use documentation to inform accommodations and supports. Documentation isn't just something to check off during intake. It can highlight functional limitations or access needs that impact how someone participates in your project or succeed in a work setting. Use it to justify and tailor accommodations, assistive technology, or environmental modifications. When you're figuring out how to support someone, this can be your best guide. Don't file documentation away and forget about it. Revisit it when you're implementing supports. It's a dynamic tool that can evolve with the participants' needs. A great resource here is the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN. They can organize accommodation ideas by functional limitations, which can help you move from "here's the barrier" to here's what we can do. For example, a participant with an IEP that mentions processing delays might benefit from extra time to complete assessments or written materials. Individualized service planning. Documentation helps you build meaningful, participant-centered goals. It can show you past support sets worked or didn't, and help you align services to real barriers impacting employment. It can also point you towards comparable benefits or existing partner programs like VR services, Medicaid waivers, or other federally funded supports that might work in tandem with your services. For example, medical confirmation of a physical disability might inform a service plan that includes job coaching or workplace accommodation modifications. Project improvements. On a broader scale, when you look across participant documentation, patterns can emerge like trends in service needs, access issues, or barriers. This gives you an opportunity to adapt your project. Maybe you need to adjust how services are delivered, provide training to staff, or develop new partnerships. For example, if you notice a trend where multiple participants need assistive technology, this might be a cue to invest in training or to look for a partner to expand your capacity. Pro tip: revisit documentation at key points, not just at intake. Eligibility documentation can actually become a roadmap for success when you fold it into planning and service conversations. And remember, you don't need every document up front to get started. If something additional is needed down the road to support a participant more efficiently, it's okay to request it later. Slide 16, key takeaways. As you move forward with your project, keep a few important things in mind. First, make sure your documentation always has a clear purpose. Every piece should connect back to eligibility, services, or supports. Next, partner smartly. It's essential that sub-awardees and partners follow clear and consistent documentation protocols. Use standardized consent and release forms that clearly explain what information can be shared, with whom, why, and for how long. This helps keep everyone on the same page and protect participants' privacy. Privacy and data security are top priorities, so collect only what's necessary and handle it carefully. Also, don't let documentation be just a box to check. Use it as a tool to improve planning, tailor services, and achieve better outcomes. And finally, keep your data management plan strong and flexible so it can adapt as your project grows and changes. Now take a moment to reflect. What is one documentation practice you plan to revisit or strengthen based on this session? Slide 17, contact information. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Disability documentation might sometimes seem complicated, but when used well, it becomes a valuable tool. If you have any questions or you need assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to your DIF Technical Assistance Liaison or email difta@neweditions.net. We truly appreciate all you do to support individuals with disabilities, and we're here to help you along the way. This concludes our presentation for today. Thank you all for joining. Disclaimer. The contents of this presentation were developed under contract 9199-0023 D0037-9199-0024 F0395 from the U.S. Department of Education Department. The department does not mandate or prescribe practices, models, or other activities described or discussed in this presentation. The contents of this presentation may contain examples of, adaptations of, and links to resources created and maintained by another public or private organization. The department does not control or guarantee the accuracy, relevance, timeliness, or completeness of this outside information. The contents of this presentation does not necessarily represent the policy of the department. This presentation is not intended to represent the views or policy of, or be an endorsement of any views expressed or materials provided by any federal agency. Edgar 75.620.